because that part of our brain is starting to switch on, we will be calming down and therefore in the present moment. Because quite often when we're not aware, we're either too future focused or we're too past focused, and we're not in the here and now.
Hello and welcome back. Now, just before we get started with this very special episode today, I'd just like to invite you that if you're watching this on the Total Somatics YouTube channel, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and press the notification bell. So every time an episode is released, you're the very first to find out. Now, I have a very special guest on today, and I know you're going to love this interview, this conversation that we have. We're covering everything to do with how people's relationships with themselves, as well as with family, friends, significant others, how it's impacted when we have a health crisis. But also we weave other parts of the subject into this discussion today. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Linda Hartley-Clark. I'm going to give you quite a lovely detailed bio about Linda. And so you have to excuse if at times I'm looking away from the camera, but I'm reading some of the most wonderful words for you. So I really want you to get yourself settled here. So if you haven't already, get yourself a nice cup of tea, put your feet up, because for the next hour and a bit, you're really going to enjoy this. Okay, so let's get started with Linda's details. So, recognised early in her life as an award-winning performing artist, Linda takes her performance talents and combines them with her passion for understanding human relationships. Linda began her professional career as a performing artist at the age of 12. This career gave her early insight into how people make sense of themselves and others in the world. Being exposed to various families on film sets and stage productions highlighted the importance of working collaboratively and feeling connected to people and places. It also helped her develop a sense of worth and value as a person and how to cope with separation from her family and friends. Coping with separation and loss was a common practice for Linda growing up. This, combined with negotiating life transitions off time, contributed to a deep sense of loneliness due to lost connections with peers and role models. For instance, when Linda was 25, most of her friends were single. Some were still living at home, whilst others were finishing university, and most were beginning their first careers. In contrast, though, Linda had been married for 3 years. She was living and working on the other side of the world, contemplating retiring from her first career and feeling anxious about the lack of formal education. All of us struggle to some degree with navigating transition and change, so I know this is really going to resonate with many of you. However, humans have this remarkable capacity to bounce back. So despite Linda's own personal struggle, she managed to relocate back to her hometown in Melbourne, Australia. And there she also held down her marriage. She returned to study as a young mother with 2 children and applied her dedication and discipline as a performing artist to graduate with a first-class psychology honours, a Master of Counselling, and with a postgraduate specialisation in couples counselling, and with the help of a prestigious scholarship, a PhD in social and mental health. Linda's been researching and practicing in social and mental health for 20 years. Nowadays, Linda runs a thriving private counselling practice in Melbourne's CBD. Her work as a relationships counsellor and a psychotherapist specialising in helping individuals and couples experience what it means for them to feel satisfied in love, in life, and in their relationships. Linda no longer dances on stage. Rather, she prefers to help clients recognise their own dance by helping them notice when they are stuck in negative ways of interacting. By helping clients tune into their emotions, which are considered the music driving the dance, Linda helps her clients find new and intimate ways of connecting. Linda also draws on prior psychology research work designing app-based mental health and well-being programs to now producing online relationship courses. Her latest online course is called Keep Love Alive, and it's designed to enhance relationship resilience. It's based on empirical research findings from leading relationship researchers all around the world. Linda combines psychoeducation with practical activities to create her unique recipe for the glue to maintaining healthy, intimate relationships over the long term. Her inquiries regarding in-person or online relationship counselling services, as well as how to enrol in her online relationship course, can be found when you go to the website lovelifeandrelationships.com.au. I'll also make sure I put that in the show notes so it's easy for you to see. But there's a contact form if you want to speak to Linda at lovelifeandrelationships.com.au. So what an amazing bio that is. And so what I want to do is, first of all, just welcome Linda to the show. And Linda, it's so good to connect with you again, because the first time we actually met was earlier this year, wasn't it, at a trauma retreat conference. And really, I just want people to, from your amazing bio, I just want people to hear your gems and your experiences. So before we go into that, how are you? What have you been up to? You were going on this amazing holiday, was it with the Egyptologists and all that? So what's happening in your life?
Oh, it's great to see you, Heidi. And thank you for that intro. I think we were chatting before we jumped on that, you forced me to write a bio. So it's all your fault, Heidi. So it was a bit embarrassing. It's always a bit uncomfortable for all of us when we hear about what we've done and what we've achieved, which is so silly, really, isn't it? But I have been away. I got to go to Egypt in April of this year. And I have never been there before. It's been a dream, like a childhood dream. So my husband and I went and we found an amazing tour group that run all kinds of offerings all throughout Egypt, and it's all things ancient Egypt. And they have Egyptologists that accompany each trip. And so we were lucky enough to go on an old boat that was built in 1918 and was the King of Egypt's boat in the early 1900s, just before the First World War. And then it was turned into a postal boat during the war. And then it went into rack and ruin, and it was restored just over 30 years ago. And they've been running, this tour company have been running tours every year for 30 years. So we were lucky enough to be part of the 30th anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah, so we had the privilege of a professor, Dr. Kent Weeks, who has discovered the Valley of the Kings, tomb number 5, and has spent his entire life excavating and working on that site. And he was instrumental in creating the Theban mapping project. So it's the first time that the Kings Valley has been mapped accurately. So yeah, this incredible man that was just on the boat with us that would then accompany us to all of these sites. And
oh my goodness,
it was astounding. Yeah, it really was.
Wow. And the boat itself, to kind of be there and hold that boat and go, if only you could speak and tell me the stories that you've seen. I often will hold a tree and say, if only you could tell me the stories of what you've seen. But it's the same with that boat. What that boat has been through. What a privilege.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So it was great.
That's brilliant. So I just want to kind of see how we can dive, because obviously into all of what you do with your skills, because when you and I connected earlier in the year, I just thought, wow. And, everyone could see from your bio just the wealth of experience in different fields that you've developed over the years. And although you've done so much study, it's also that lived experience, which is absolutely valuable. So because you've had this fascinating journey so far, what I'd love to do is pick your brains, if that's possible, on navigating like the ups and downs of life, of when we have like a prognosis or a diagnosis, and how that impacts our personal relationship. So how we deal with ourselves, but also the dynamics change a great deal with our significant other, and sometimes with family and friends. Some people might feel that they need to disconnect from a social circle just because they aren't the person they were before, and there's a lot of limiting beliefs or self-talk that can create like a form of self-sabotage, really. And really wanting to kind of get your insight on that, because that is very much your specialism, really. So I was thinking of first of all, like, there's the subject of self-awareness, because, you know, it's obviously really good for us to understand ourselves, and many people need that support, really. Because how would you say that increasing self-awareness can help individuals to cope better with their health challenges? What would you say about that?
Well, you know, it's so easy, you know, to say and to answer that question, and for it to sound frivolous and light and easy to do, you know. But, you know, fundamentally, if we're not self-aware, we can't take care of ourselves. And so if everybody knew how, you know, if we knew that little term, we'd all be fine. But of course, we have these masterful ways of jumping out of our own selves, out of our bodies, to keep on keeping on. And so our nervous systems and our bodies are in distress most of the time, and we don't know. And we are adopting all kinds of strategies, whether it's, you know, running and fleeing, whether it's attacking and solving and fixing, whether it's shutting down completely, whether it's cling, 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 don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. All of these strategies that our body gets us doing to run away from ourselves. And so it's very difficult to stay self-aware, to stay in touch, to pursue ourselves rather than pursue or run from ourselves. So
I was going to say, Linda, you know, just feeding off what you're saying, I've literally, before we came on, I've just been recording a few podcast episodes, and I was talking about intergenerational health issues and default patterns and behaviors. And I just thought, because of that self-awareness, you know, sometimes there's that put into the equation, isn't it? Because of influential people raising us over the years, it depends on what their insight was like for themselves, because sometimes we just carry on that trait, don't we?
Absolutely. That intergenerational trauma is handed down throughout the generations, and trauma inside drives those reactive patterns. So our secondary emotions, that right brain, that right side of our brain that switches on, that says we have to do anything to stay alive, not thrive, to stay alive. And we don't know that that's running the show and pulling focus on our ability to stay connected to ourselves, so that through that self-awareness, pursuing self, and then staying connected to other, because we don't have to do this alone, but we have to feel safe to feel like we want to trust in that connection with another. So,
if somebody's got a challenge, though, and they find it really hard to be aware of themselves, and that in itself is a bit of a confusing question, because how would you know? But if you know where I'm going with this, what would be one of the most foundational steps you would say, just to start with that self-awareness? If it was just one thing that somebody could start to adopt, if they question, if they have very little insight into themselves, what would you suggest?
Well, I think that the easiest thing, because what's happening is the left side of our brain and our frontal cortex is switching off. And so the right side of our brain, which is only interested in staying alive, is running the show, as I said. So we've got to name what's happening in order to tame and calm down that right side of our brain. So scaling, where am I right now, is engaging our frontal cortex, because we've actually got to imagine a scale. We've got to then work out, well, where am I on it? And I guarantee you, because that part of our brain is starting to switch on, we will be calming down and therefore in the present moment. Because quite often when we're not aware, we're either too future focused or we're too past focused, and we're not in the here and now. And that's what we want to do. So even if we can scale it and say, well, I'm pinging off the walls and I'm at 9 and I'm worrying about my future and what this health diagnosis represents for me, oh my gosh, and off we go into the future. And then we flip back into the past with all of that grief and loss of what could have been and what I'm leaving behind. We're right up at either end of those scales. And we just want to nudge just one little step at a time. How do I get one step back into the present? And so that's something that I will help my clients who have trauma histories. That's one little strategy that they can use amongst many others.
Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? Is in these sorts of situations, that's why I'm going to make sure all your details are in the show notes, because it's we can talk generally here, but it really depends on that individual, their specific needs. There's so many layers to it, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yes. Yeah. So, some people that have had an extremely traumatic event happen, one of the easiest pathways is to ground and to focus on our breathing. But sometimes folks that can focus on their breathing, it freaks them out even more. And that's not helpful. So we want to have, as you said, it's a very personal and a very experiential process for each individual. Yeah.
I think that's a really good word when you say experiential, because sometimes people haven't allowed for that curiosity to be around, have they? Which involves, that frontal part, isn't it? Where that curiosity comes in, because they might have always been told this is so, or they didn't have that trust that they could experiment and see where this goes. Does that make sense? It's giving them a little bit more authority, control, because sometimes it may be that they've allowed other people to have that control.
Absolutely. And that's a reality for them. So we want to validate that experience and how hard that is. And so to know that that's happening, despite that, we're also able to create a little bit of distance and therefore get curious through distancing and separation that creates that. So I always say that the C words, curiosity, clarity, leads to creativity, calm and contentment. So we've got that space to sort of distance and step back, but also fit in all of it, because what's happening is real for that person. And I suppose that's where compassion comes in as well, another C word, where we want to have that ability to say, you're not alone. This is something that humanity can share in and has shared in, and that we can create then some loving kindness for ourselves in that plight, so that we're learning that level of self-care, I suppose.
And I suppose that's because I've got my little pointers here that we're going to weave in, but that kind of ties into where I was going to mention next, where we talked about empowerment strategies, because that's really what it's doing, isn't it? It's starting to bring back that feeling of being empowered. Because I know, Linda, over the years, and I mentioned this when I've done online events and things, I'll get people online or in the clinic coming in, and they've been given one name, one label, one prognosis, one diagnosis. They've been given so many conflicting things that they actually don't even know who they are, what they are. And when they'll come and see me, they'll say, we'll do something. They'll go, so am I better? And they're asking me if they're better, whereas it's I'm wanting them to start noticing and feeling and sensing. And it's really what I'm wanting to do is empower them, bring skills and techniques and that sort of thing. But have you ever seen that with your clinical practice, where people just lose their identity in the end and they just feel like they've been taken through the system and they don't really know who they are, what their prognosis is? And so they kind of numb out a little bit. Have you ever noticed that?
Absolutely. And that's, when we think about the word empowerment, so how can I take back my own personal power and feel like whilst I am struggling and I am vulnerable, it's okay. It's okay to struggle, and it's okay not to know, and it's okay that I don't know how to solve my problem yet. And the yet is crucial, because if we don't remain in an empowered place through, it's okay. There's so much strength in vulnerability. It's okay to suffer. It makes sense that we're suffering. That we fall into, it's as if we're in this helpless, hopeless place, and we need those authority figures or the system to tell us what we've got, or provide a label for our condition, or to get us into such confusion that we're falling into the arms of health providers to say, well, tell me what to do or give me the label. So we're in the advice giving, and that's another signal and sign that, again, right brain is driving the show here, pulling focus on our ability to stay connected to ourselves. That, it is really difficult, and it's all right not to know. It's all right to feel confused. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point, because we live in a society where everyone Googles for an answer or a result. And sometimes it is just that evolution of discovering who you are. And if you are going in, it could even be, if we talk about this and weave this in, because this has been a huge conversation in recent years, is like things like menopause. That's got its own catalogue of things that can happen. So even if it's something like menopause, or it's chronic issues and illnesses that have happened, it's, as you mentioned before, it's kind of navigating this new direction of where we go. And because some people can feel like it's almost like a bit of a bereavement to the person you were before, but we all have we transition all the time, don't we? We have different seasons in our life, and that's really kind of tying in with what you're saying, isn't it?
It is. And even I was, as you were talking then, I was just thinking about my own relationships and how there is great grief around letting go of how we used to function, or feeling like we were across our functioning physically and physiologically. So with perimenopause and menopause, we're starting to learn that women don't think that they're becoming aware for the first time that they might have been perimenopausal for 15 years, and living in that confusion and that unknowing and needing fixes. And so again, you can see that fix, solve, because the anxiety levels, our cortisol levels, are through the roof because we're feeling out of control. So then what do? We want to go and control it again, as opposed to feeling all of it. What is it like to feel out of control? It's not nice. But what's one thing I can do right now for myself, that helps me feel just a little bit better, like a little bit more empowered, a little bit more that, that I have a little bit more agency and autonomy. Yeah.
It is. And I suppose that's bringing in like that role of mindfulness, really, isn't it? Because we're really starting to bring our awareness to that. And so how would you say that mindfulness practice can enhance our relationships? And I'm including not just for ourselves personally, but for all of those around us, the different situations that we have during those uncertain times. How would you say that can support us?
Well, again, it's keeping us in the present moment, and it's also it's improving our self-awareness. It's also training our minds to stay in the present moment, and we know when it wanders off, we just gently invite it to come back. And so so it's not a bad thing that we notice how distracted our mind is and how masterful our mind is at getting us away from ourselves. So it's befriending that nervous system, and to say, come back in, invite it back in, because it's safe here. So I think it's feeling better at being in one's own body, being more attuned to one's own body, and then with that being able to mindfully then attend to ourselves and another's body. So we can pick up cues of danger and cues of safety in another, so our most precious others, whether that's partners or children or family members. So we can pick those cues up and then be able to respond, but also know that that's not our distress. We're in our bodies. So it's being able to, what we call in the relationship game, differentiate. So we know that these are my feelings, that I'm actually feeling concern for my partner or for my family member, but I'm managing my anxiety around the other's plight long enough to be able to walk over into their shoes and help and soothe them, if that's what they're needing. So yeah, I think the role of mindfulness is there's a dual process going on. It's, you know, relationship to self, but also then feeling grounded enough in our bodies and self-aware to then relate safely out there to another.
Yeah. And I was thinking of what your thoughts are in this, because doing a lot of pain science and pain management with people over the years, what can happen is that, have you ever heard the terminology where people do this, that they'll refer to their back, say, or their knee, and they'll say something like, the back's really playing me up today, or this knee is really irritating me, and then they have all this negative narrative around it of, this knee's stopped me from doing this, that, and the other. And I'll kind of try and encourage them over that time to create that, it's that part of that mindfulness or that embodimentness to actually go, that's actually your knee or that's your back. And it's bringing it together. Because when you're mentioning about coming back to yourself, it's that ownership of all of that is part of your beautiful soma, really. And it's what has made you the special person, the unique person you are today. And trying to switch it a little bit so that they don't say the or this as if they're pointing the finger, but it's actually part of them, which can be a challenge when there's pain and there can be a lot of anger towards it. But what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you completely that it is a part of the self that's being expressed through the pain of the knee. And so we want to understand that painful part. So I will try and integrate with a client that part of themselves that is the knee, as a part of their psyche, a part of their pain, their psychological distress. And so we want to take that wise adult and inquire to that adaptive child, usually, but that part of themselves that's angry and is in pain and is distressed. And we want to understand that part. And we want that separation again from wise adults saying, I'm here, and I want to understand that part of you that's in so much pain, and that you're not alone. I'm here. And that again creates an integration for that whole person to understand it's a part of their expression that needs to be expressed, but also, to have their wise adult selves wrap their arms around that little part and give them a cuddle.
Yeah. It's so complex, isn't it? I mean, that's why, again, it's very specialized to the individual of what it is, really. I was thinking, delving into like the mindfulness and then even that self-talk and things. I obviously we're developing this, but I keep looking at some of these points because it's like really weaving quite nicely into it, if that's okay. But I've got that effective communication, and I've put here like, what are the key components to effective communication with loved ones and healthcare practitioners in a health crisis? I've got that. Can I add something else into that, which is what you just mentioned? Is, when we talk about the mindfulness and how we know ourselves, but then with other people, it's how we're effective with our communication to say, look, I'm not how I was before this particular, say, health situation? How can we work through this together? Or, that sort of gist of a conversation. Do you know where I'm going, of how we manage this whole scenario? Because it turns people's lives upside down. I know you would have seen it. I've seen it here. And I'm sure people watching or listening can resonate with this. So it's really how we can make that communication effective for ourselves, to others, and healthcare providers, really.
Well, when we're in a health crisis, the stakes are so much higher around how risky it is to be vulnerable, because, some of the things we've mentioned earlier, there's great grief and loss, there's struggle around transition and change for everybody in relationship, whether that's in relationship to themselves and a diagnosis, in relationships more generally. There's nothing more tricky for us as human mammals on this planet to navigate transition and change. So when there's a traumatic transition, a life event that, throws a curveball at us, it makes us incredibly vulnerable to discuss that. So for effective communication to, and again, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to get this wrong. But if we can, I love so a lot of my work I do is emotionally focused. And Sue Johnson, who is, the late Sue Johnson, she passed away recently, but she has founded emotionally focused therapy for couples. And one of the, she creates the word love, and she creates an acronym for that. And so L is to listen with an open heart and mind. So again, however, when we are in crisis, it's really hard to listen because that right brain is driving the show. Yeah. The left brain is responsible for us integrating what we're hearing, what we can say, how we're making sense of it. So it is so important to hold on to ourselves and continue to listen, but not just any old listening. We want to be able to listen, with an open heart and mind. So, listening, it requires sort of tuning in to what's said and felt, but not only in the words, but also for what's said by way of facial expression and body language. So again, that mindful noticing, that curiosity, that opens up our senses, it opens up our ears, it opens up our sight, it opens up our heart to listening to that vulnerable person. And that's requiring not just taking in words, but tracking that person's nonverbal cues, but openly. So how do we listen openly? Well, with curiosity. And I always think about it in terms of couples work where, when you first meet and you're just so fascinated and you just can't stop hearing from the other. So it's that listening openly, like you just met. So if you can just, pop that in your mind, but not in a romantic way, of course. If it's family members, if it's a couple, then yes. But if it's in a compassionate way, and you're dealing with healthcare providers, you want that openness, to be curiosity and a willingness to accept something new that you might not have heard before. So that's the L and the O. The V is to validate. So it makes sense. You want to be able to walk alongside the person that's sharing, because what they're sharing is very vulnerable and it's so risky. If it's vulnerable, it's very risky to share. And it's probably new for them. So there's nothing more anxiety provoking for people than to be sharing something new and vulnerable. And most people won't do that. So the person on the receiving end, their job is to listen openly, an open heart and mind, and then walk alongside, acknowledge the experience is absolutely legitimate for them. And that then, of course, increases respect for their view of their reality. Because remember, there's no objective reality when it comes to relationships. It's only people's subjective realities. So that means the way they see the world 9 times out of 10 is very different to the way you see the world. So once you can validate and walk alongside their experience of their reality, then you set the scene to be able to express and have conversations about those vulnerable feelings, those hopes, those dreams, those disappointments. And that, of course, strengthens those emotional bonds between people. So, you know, my couples work, it's the emotional bond, the emotional intimacy between couples. But it's the same in all relationships. So LOVE, listen openly and validate and express. Says Sue Johnson.
Oh, bless her. And I do think, though, they're really powerful, that the LOVE, really, when you pull that apart, because that's perfect, isn't it, in an ideal setting? But you could have the partner of that person in denial for that health situation, or so it's kind of having the patience as well, isn't it, that you would navigate through that at the right time. And I'm assuming that's where you'd probably be saying, well, this is where you need to have that support, like with couples counselling, to deal with that, because it can be bringing up a lot of past trauma, a lot of stories, a lot of fear with that other person that doesn't want to, because they feel that person's going through enough. They don't want to feel like they're going to burden them with more. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that speaks to our attachment styles. So if somebody, you know, says, oh, I don't want a burden, I'll stay away, then there's their withdrawal or their avoidance, or they're moving away, not because they don't want to be in connection, because they think, they feel I'll make it worse, or I'll get it wrong, or I don't know what to say, or it's better, not to upset. I might upset, so I'll stay away. And of course, that's not what the person that's struggling needs. The person needs the connection, the validation, the listening openly, so that they're safe enough to express. But of course, in that example, the mover awayer, that's that nervous system response. That's the right brain, saying, I'm going to run, I'm going to stay away. So in my couples work, if that was presented in the room, we would have 3 entities to deal with. We would have partner A and partner B and the diagnosis. And so the diagnosis, when the diagnosis enters their interactive pattern, so how they communicate, they go into this distance. And maybe the person suffering might cling. You're not there for me, you're abandoning me. It might be that, or they might withdraw too and shut down and numb. They might, go to bed and collapse. So it's withdraw. When the illness is driving the show, or the diagnosis is driving the show. So we want to look at when the pattern has the diagnosis in and when it's out. And so when it's out, they're safe. They feel safe again to trust. So it's externalizing the problem that helps couples understand. And I hope that can translate to your clients, because I'm relating this particular example to couple work, but it's the same out there in the world for an individual and a care team, or an individual just grappling with that themselves. When I think too far into the future or too far into the past, I numb and I cut myself off from my body because it's too painful. But when I'm in the present and I'm mindfully noticing what I achieved today as opposed to half an hour ago, then I'm empowered again.
And it is just taking those small steps, because there's so much shock going on, isn't there, in the nervous system's a change of so many dynamics anyway. So I mean, that's what's really great, is that people that are listening to this all around the world will have that opportunity. And that's the thing, Linda, I know that there are things that you have available that people can look into online. I think you've got some online courses and things like that, so they can look into more. And again, I'll put all those details in the show notes. But that's the thing, is if there's other people in other situations elsewhere, it's just sometimes that support from this discussion, that they sometimes just need that extra person to come in to help them navigate the situation, because they're coming in sometimes back into those default behaviors and patterns, aren't they? And they just need that that person from outside of the situation to kind of help navigate them through this particular part of their life.
Yes, and I want to add to that what happens when trauma, so when a big life event comes in. Now, this could be any life event. So it could, in your world, it's a health diagnosis, but it could be transitioning to parenthood for the first time, getting married, losing a job, any event that creates trauma and stress takes relationships back into deep, old patterns from growing up experiences. And so that can destabilize individuals and couples, because they think, what's wrong with me? Why are we showing up like this? Or why am I not able to manage myself? And it's not just because, this has happened. It's normally I would deal with this in a different way. But the more traumatizing an event is, the more likely we are to go back to these very, very old primitive ways of dealing with trauma. And so in my world, it's attachment trauma. But in your world, it's a health issue. But the trauma inside is around losing ourselves, or losing a partner, or not meeting expectations in the relationship in the way that we ought to have.
And I think, irrespective of whatever the subject is, of what that trigger is, if we go back to those behaviors, something that then I thought comes up, because I've heard people say this before, is it's like an element of shame, as if, I can't believe I let myself say that or do that. I thought I overcame that years ago. And then that piles on even more anxiety and stress. But shame is a really powerful emotion, isn't it?
It is, because we cannot experience shame unless it's in relationship with our something that's happened in the view of another's eyes. So shame's the only emotion that it has a social component, or an interrelational component to it. So, and of course the action tendency for shame is to hide. So we will then we'll do so much not to express that, or to hide that, and any behaviors that are associated with that.
So I think that's why it's really good for people to get that additional support, because just as we start peeling all those layers back, it's so complex, really, isn't it? So that's why, definitely there'll be resources for people to find out more about you, Linda, but also just wherever they live in the world, just to seek out that support if they need something in person, which is so important, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I was going to say, feeding onto one of my other bullet points here, I know we're kind of like weaving into them, but I'm trying to stay on track, because if people know what my podcasts are like, sometimes I go weaving off with our guests. So I'm trying to keep this very structured if I can. But I've got here those, and we've probably covered it really, but self-compassion practices. I've put here, can you suggest some self-compassion practices for those facing health issues? So I kind of weaved in a little bit of what we've done, but I just thought in case there's anything we've missed.
Yeah. Well, we can start any kind of self-compassion practice with a grounding exercise. So we think about self-awareness. So going back to the original, if we're not self-aware, how can we take care? And therefore, when we do take care, we can then connect to that compassion that we can feel for ourselves and other. So to begin a journey where we get to self-compassion, it is through mindfulness, so we can ground to connect to our bodies and through our bodies, because that's where all our emotion it lives and is housed. And so, and these are our unconscious processes. So our pathway to feeling anything is through our body. So grounding and body scans, and tracking bodily felt sensation. So getting curious about and using our senses. So, what does it feel like for me to sit here in the chair right now talking to you, and I can feel the backs of my thighs I'm sitting on a plastic chair, so it's quite hard. But I don't have any back support right now, so I'm noticing that I'm holding on to my abdominal muscles and my glutes a bit. If I just want to let that relax a little, and I can notice my breath. I'm okay with focusing on my breath today. Some days I'm not. Makes my heart race. Sometimes I can close my eyes, other times I can't, so I'll just look down at the floor. So it's just moment by moment tracking to ground myself in my body. We can use visualization. So I love the visual aid of roots growing out the bottom of my feet and traveling deep, 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 deep down into the earth and out to the sides. And then we want to use an expansion technique where you could then say, and where do the roots go? They go down the bottom on the second floor of my office here. So they could go right down, right into office 1. They might curl around someone's office chair. They might go down into the basement, into the car park. They might go underneath my car. They might then dig down under the cement, and then they might travel across Melbourne, and then they're going to cross the sea. They're going to go over the Tasman Sea, and then we're going to get to Hawaii. We might stop off at Hawaii. Why not? And then we're going to go to the other side of the world. And then, so there's that sort of, all right, I'm now really in the present, and I'm journeying through that present moment awareness. I can also track when I get distracted and I get a bit bored with where these roots are going, and then I can invite myself back. So all that mindfulness we can start with. And then we want to be able to, another way to start to notice ourselves and other is we can have images. So whether they're in our mind or whether we can focus on a photograph or an image in a book that resonates, and we can then open our eyes during that grounding exercise and focus on other and practice, closing our eyes back into ourselves, opening our eyes, focusing on the other, and taking in all aspects of what you see in that image or that memory. So again, we've got all of these tools that we can rely on, which is basically our sensation, all of our senses. And with you, it's kinesthetic sense, it's body, body, body. So, and then, of course, then we want this compassionate piece where we're taking a moment to breathe, we're going inwards, we're doing that grounding, we're becoming aware of what's really happening. So go back to, say, your client with the anger towards their knee. Then we move into that territory where, it could be something that knee represents is unresolved from the past, or so we want to get curious because we want to gain clarity. So there's the distancing and the beginning of taking that kind, mindful inquiry about the self and walking alongside. So, we can even ask, how do these emotions feel in my body? Where do I physically feel them? So he was saying, in my knee. And so we want to place a loving hand so we can start to then engage in an enactment for ourselves. So we could, encourage ourselves to place that loving hand on that body part and to really get curious. So like the LOV conversation, I want to understand where you feel the pain. I'm here. I understand you. It makes sense. So there's the validation. So there's the self-compassion, I suppose. So we can do all kinds of mindfulness meditations around incorporating awareness, compassion, empowerment within that whole practice. Yeah.
I mean, that's brilliant. While you've been mentioning the last bit about the knee, I don't know if you were doing it, Linda, but I just maybe like I'm mirroring you through the airways. But I'm just like rubbing my knee.
Me
Like
too.
I thought you might have been. And I was like, oh, do you know, just doing that kind of in my mind brings back like that self-soothing when you were little, when your mum would just rub your elbow if you'd hurt it and say, it'll be okay. And it's literally almost like that feeling and that memory bank came back. And if you've got somebody with such anger and resentment to the area that they've just literally been pointing at it, but then you get them just, as you say, just to hold it, because it is part of them. And like a third of our sensory motor cortex, a third of that is our hand. When you look at the real estate, it's like biohacking, and we're using a large part of our sensory system just to bring our awareness to there, isn't it? When we're touching that area. So it's a huge connection back, isn't it? That just was a thought that came in, because you do feel like a bit of a shift, as if everything will be okay. And I know that's very simplistic, but I felt like a shift.
Well, that's our emotion regulation tool, isn't it? The self-soothing. So we can do this. We've got this. So there's empowerment. We've got this.
It's funny how we're both doing it together. It's like, I thought,
I know.
She's got into the same rhythm as me.
And even rocking is self-soothing.
I love rocking. Absolutely.
Me too.
I love the rock. I do a lot of just holding and rocking, and sometimes tapping. If there's a lot of tension, or you feel your breathing's not too deep, I'll just do this. And it is like, it's just self-soothing, isn't it? It's really powerful.
Really powerful.
I do a lot of rocking, so you might see the face getting closer to the camera disappearing.
Me too. And I used to feel ashamed. I used to say, they know those people out there know that I'm not managing right now. So now I don't do that. I'm in recovery constantly.
Well, I'm always saying somas exist in time. So however we are today is going to be different later today. It's different from this morning. It'll be different tomorrow. So literally, it's just we kind of explore how we feel and navigate throughout the day, don't we? So we're never set in stone. We're always changing and evolving. It's so true. So I was going to say, as we start to move forward into like resilience building, how would you say we could build resilience during turbulent times? Because it can be a bit of a roller coaster, the ups and downs. What could we do?
It's mining for positive moments, because, our neural networks are still designed and have evolved from our hunter-gatherer ancestors. So whilst we're wired to detect danger and threat in our environment, and we're also wired to affiliate and connect in a safe way, the cues of danger will always trump cues of safety. So when a crisis strikes, those negative appraisals of ourselves and others and the world are going to come thick and fast. And so we have to work a little bit harder. And there's good research on this. It's a 5-to-1 ratio. 5-to-1 meaning 5 positive appraisals. We've got to scan ourselves, other, and the world for 5 more positive appraisals to 1 negative appraisal to keep us on an even keel. So to exceed a 5-to-1 ratio is resilience building. And so then we want to add, and this is what we learned in our professional development training, another lovely way to talk about it is we're creating glimmers. So whether that's moment by moment glimmers, the positive things that have happened, and then they get stored in our memory bank and we can bring those to mind. And that's harder because the negatives will come to mind faster and more intensely. And we've got to actually search. It's a slower, more effortful search to find the positives. So it's finding ways then to write that down, to document it. And so we want to photograph, we want to create lists in our phone, we want to do anything we can, stick our things on the fridge, on Post-it notes. We've got to do whatever we can so that we don't give up on that effortful processing, so that we can find those cues of safety and those memories of positive appraisal of self, other, and the world out there to keep building resilience. So that's some things we can do. And of course, then, if you're in relationships, it's having those LOVE conversations, and it's, couples, they think that oh my gosh, we've got to, schedule this in, and we've got to go out on a date night, and we've got to, do something special, to stay glued together, which is resilience. How do we hold on to each other? Oh God, well, we might have to go out for dinner, but life gets in the way and we've got to cancel it, so then it never happens.
Yeah.
So it literally takes 5 minutes a day, where we're not talking about, it doesn't mean you can't talk about work, or kids, or the illness and the diagnosis, and what needs to get done around all of that stuff, which is teamwork and walking side by side, but the eye-to-eye resilience building, whether that's in a relationship or whether an individual is, I'm looking eye to eye at myself right now and what feels good. And what's one thing I can do for myself? So this was our workshop again, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That can keep me up in that safe place where I'm connected to myself and connected to others in the world. Yeah. So how can I keep myself up there for longer? And then we're going to slip down because we're human. We're going to go back down into fix, freeze, flight, fight, collapse. We're going to go up and down that ladder. But how do we stay up there for longer in that safe place? So,
and I think it's a really good point that it is manageable, isn't it? Because I did smile and I thought, I've heard it so many times over the years from people. They'll go, we've been told we've got to do a date night. You hear that, especially if they've got like caring for their parents and they've got the children, and it's like they just can't be bothered because they've got so many other things, or budget is an issue, and they're like, well, we've got a lot of expenditure this month, we can't really afford to go out. So it's actually finding realistic, time efficient ways to do these things.
Yep. And then the C words come in again in terms of let's get creative. We do not have to outsource fun, because sometimes we don't have time is our enemy, and also money can be an enemy. There's not enough resources to outsource fun. So how do we get creative about how we have a date night, for instance, or how do we connect in that way? I mean, there's some lovely games out there. One game springs to mind. It's called Yum. And that's a lovely game to play for couples. But yeah, I'm getting off track a little bit because I go back into my couple work. So sorry.
Oh, no, it's great. Everyone will be Googling it now.
Yeah, Yum. And John Gottman, who's, an absolute amazing relationship therapist, and his wife, Julie Gottman, is an incredible researcher, and the two of them have been conducting research and applying it into practice for many, many, many years. And they have a lot of wonderful games to play that are quite famous as well. So if people want to just Google the Gottman Institute as well, there's some lovely, lovely things online, free resources as well. So,
and I think it's really important, Linda, because if you go back to the early days, I'm sure you've done this loads of times in your practice, but when you've got couples that are just like disconnected, they're finding fault with each other, and then you might say to them, how did you first meet, or how did you fall in love? And then their face changes, there's this big smile on their face, and they go back to those memories. And then what's sometimes happened is sicknesses or just life in general just builds up, and people just get stuck in this routine or this rut. And like you're saying with those games, it brings a bit of fun and curiosity and jokiness. And because some couples, I've had people say to me, I can't remember the last time we actually had a proper laugh. Which, you know, and you think, because they've got so many pressures with lots of people wanting their attention. And just those sorts of things, it just brings back that bit of zest or excitement or you know, fun, really.
Yes. And that question is asked at intake, session 1. Yeah. How did the two of you meet? And you see it. And so what that's designed to do is to find what glued them together in the first place, the resilience. Yeah. How do you have fun back then? Yeah. So stay back then. How did you have fun back then? Oh, we did this, and they can access it like that. Compared to before, what do you do for fun now? Oh, we haven't had fun in a long time. So you can see the pain and the hurt and the pull, the longing back to, So that's where going back into the past is a really good thing.
That's right. That's right. We're going to pick and choose when we do it, and that's the right time.
Do that. We're going back there. For very good reason.
So just wanted to mention a couple more points, if that's all right. And I was going to say, you know, when people are looking at their mental health and focusing on the mental health generally, I've put here, what role does mental health play in our overall well-being and relationships during health struggles? We've covered a lot of it anyway, but I just thought if there's any little bits that you think we may not have developed.
The only thing I could add is, you know, personally, and what I do for a living, I think it's crucial. It drives it. And in my PhD thesis, I had a look at the role of mental health and ill health. So, you know, mental health's a big umbrella term, but if we're looking at, say, the impact on life dissatisfaction and the impact of stress on our lives and those events that can create that stress, and that sort of, so living under distress, psychological distress, and not managing that, not learning those tools, everything we've talked about today and many, many other ways as well, that creates what we call an allostatic load. So all those vital systems of our body, all our hormones, everything that regulates those vital systems, so heart rate, temperature, insulin levels, bone density, all of that is impacted because those hormones that are regulatory hormones are overloaded. And so the stress creates that. And then when that's overloaded, we then develop chronic health disease. So, and it's a big mindset shift, particularly when I was doing my PhD research, which was in 2010. This was a bit, you know, I don't know if you can put that in. So
that's really changed though in those years though. That's really changed. I mean, just to mind came about how cortisol, you know, cortisol's being mentioned everywhere on the internet now. People are doing cortisol courses and things, but you know, that in itself, high levels of that long time will cause like demineralization with the bones and, you know, for osteoporosis and all sorts, as well as inflammation generally. But it's interesting that 2010, that was still not so.
Yeah, it was, there were very few people writing about it. And, you know, I had a couple of colleagues in my university world that would sort of question it a little bit. Why is that necessary to put in? I said, it's really necessary. Because I was looking at the impact of emotions, and how we make sense of those emotions on our appraisals of whether we're doing okay in the world, so whether we're satisfied with life. Yeah.
That's
So
absolutely fascinating.
yeah.
God. 2010 seems that's the year we emigrated to Australia. It's like that's 14 years ago now, isn't it? I bet you
Yeah.
can't believe where that time's gone.
I can't. And I got it off a memory stick for the first time, and have finally had it bound this year, which is really naughty of me, but it also says something about my experience doing the PhD. I didn't want to ever see it again, but it was really great doing it. Well, when I was doing it, it was fantastic. I had a ball. But yeah.
You just left it for a while just to decompress.
Yes.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I've got one more little bullet point, if that's all right, just to
Of
cover
course.
and bring it all together. But again, we've probably covered it, but I just thought in case. And it's about support systems. So we kind of have covered a fair bit. But how can individuals create and maintain a supportive network in the face of health uncertainties?
I think it's so important when people are extremely vulnerable that they stay in their reality. When the world says, oh, you should be seeking support, or, how many people can you turn to for that support? And some folk might say, there's nobody I trust. And that's okay. So it's learning how much support do we need, and the level of support it has to be something or someone or somewhere that we can go where we feel safe to connect with. So again, those appraisals of how present moment awareness, what can I give you? What can't I give today? If today feels like a place of vulnerability and I don't want to see the world, well, that's fine. How am I feeling this afternoon? Well, maybe, I might want to go for a walk. I'll do that on my own, but I'm seeking that support from nature, or I'm seeking that support because I'm mindfully walking. And look at how well, my wise adult self is supporting my vulnerable child self. But I think, it's essential, whatever supports are in place, they have to feel safe enough to trust in, so then we can stay connected.
And also being comfortable in the sense that if you're naturally more of an introvert, it's actually you're going to recharge more or feel better sometimes having that time on your own than feeling that you've got to be pushed into a situation where there's lots of people, thinking that's good. Because you can actually be in a group of people and be incredibly lonely and not feel that there's that support. So it's kind of meeting where you're at if you're naturally more of an introvert, and that's how you kind of recharge your batteries, as it were.
Absolutely. And introverts, it's not that they're not social, it's that a social interaction is exhaustive because they're highly sensitized to the stimuli. So, and even extroverts who are highly sensitized to stimuli, boy, burnout time.
Oh no. Well, it's been absolutely brilliant today, Linda. I've really enjoyed it. And I was going to say, is there anything that we haven't brought out that you would like to bring out as we come to a close here? Because we've covered all bases, but there might be something you want to share, a gem or something that we haven't discussed.
Really, I think our chat's been, I hope it's been worthwhile.
Oh, it's been brilliant. Well, I'm speaking on behalf of many people around the world here, so I hope you all agree with me, but it's been absolutely brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. Enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. And I was going to say, everybody that's watching this, if you're watching this like on the Total Somatics YouTube channel, please leave some of your takeaway points. Or if you don't want to do it that way, you can always contact Linda. Just give us, let her know how that kind of resonated with you, her takeaway points, or if you want to contact me. We're here, aren't we, Linda? That's the thing, is that although we're discussing in this situation. It's also putting that offer out there that we can be there to support them if they want to reach out to us too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we might be on the southern hemisphere, but anyone that's watching it the other side of the world, we're still there for them too. We might just be fast
Absolutely
asleep
we
when
are.
they email us.
Yes. We might be having some SEDS.
Yeah, do right. Oh, so thank you so much again, Linda. And on behalf of everybody watching this and listening, we really appreciate you taking your time because I've taken a bit of your time today. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Oh, bless you. So for everyone watching this, Linda and I just send our love and all our best wishes, and we're blowing all these kisses through the cyber universe to you. You want to do that again, Linda? Because oh, bless. So she's been kissing. We've both been kissing. So hopefully you can feel the love wherever you are in the world. As I said, show notes will have all the details of how you can get hold of Linda if you want to reach out to her. But again, thank you so much again, Linda, for spending time with us today and sharing all your incredible gems. And hopefully we'll catch up and connect again soon in this forum. But I think hopefully we'll connect outside of here too if you're over this way too. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome, Heidi. It's great to see you.
Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and also forward this on to somebody you know will benefit. To learn more about pain relief, plus how to improve